Chapter 25. Germany signs a blank check. The truth of the matter was that, with the possible exception of Berchtold, few in Austria-Hungary were sorry that Franz Ferdinand had been removed from the scene. True, the leaders of the dual monarchy deplored the killing of royalty, but if someone of the blood had to be sacrificed, the Archduke was everybody's choice to be the one. Of course the heir apparent was, next only to the Emperor, the most important figure in the Habsburg Empire. In murdering him, upstart Serbian terrorists threw down a public challenge to the very existence of the empire. If Vienna failed to respond, it would lose by default. Such an argument could be and was plausibly made at the time and by many historians since. It was not, however, the reason that the dual monarchy sought to destroy Serbia. It could not have been the reason, for, Franz Ferdinand apart, the Habsburg leaders wanted to destroy Serbia before the assassination. They would have launched their campaign not in 1914, but in 1912 or 1913, had they not been blocked. The opinion of Europe had stood in their way, as did the fear of Russia and as did the lack of German support. What the killings gave Vienna was not a reason, but an excuse, for taking action. They provided the Austrians with grounds for destroying Serbia, a pretext that Europe would accept and believe, and with which Europe might well even sympathize. It was a justification that might bring Germany to support them and prevent Russia from opposing them. In the past, two men, Franz Ferdinand and Wilhelm II, had stood in the way of mounting a crusade against Serbia, and the assassinations had, though in different ways, removed them both, the Archduke killed, and the Kaiser carried away by a desire for revenge and caught up in unthinking rage. In the course of the Balkan Wars of 1912-13, Austria had developed a fear of Serbia that bordered on the hysterical. The Kaiser had discounted such fears, to Vienna's intense chagrin. Now, at last, the volatile Wilhelm had been turned around by the events in Sarajevo. In this respect, and from Vienna's point of view, Gavrilo Princip had committed the perfect crime. Just after the murders, when Germany's ambassador in Vienna ventured to offer advice to his hosts to go slowly and be cautious, the Kaiser was enraged. Who authorized him to act that way? That is very stupid. It is none of his business, as it is solely the affair of Austria what she plans to do in this case. Wilhelm himself now believed that the Balkan situation could be righted only by force. How would the Habsburg government respond to events? The official in charge of foreign policy was Leopold von Berchtold. It was to him that the dual monarchy, and Europe, looked for the answer. Aged 51 in 1914, the minister was ill-fitted for leadership. Berchtold had accepted office only with the greatest reluctance. Appointed when Ehrenthal died in 1912, he had retained Ehrenthal's fervent young staff members and tended to let them have their way. Indecisive and intellectually shallow, but a person of charm and manners, he was best suited to a playboy life. Born wealthy, he had become one of the richest men in the empire through marriage. He had lands and stables. He was a diplomat by nature, but an amateur foreign minister. In the past Berchtold had equivocated on the Serbia issue. Franz Ferdinand, after the Konopisk meetings in mid-June, believed that the foreign minister agreed with him that the dual monarchy should leave the Serbs alone. But the memorandum that Berchtold had commissioned from his ministry, from Franz von Macheco in collaboration with Ludwig von Flotto and Johann Forgok, officials in the expansionist tradition of Ehrenthal, advocated a forward policy, a close and active German-Austrian alliance that would take the offensive in Europe against a supposed Russian threat. The memorandum envisaged, among other things, the diplomatic encirclement of Serbia. Immediately after the assassinations, Berchtold gave orders to revise the memorandum, in the light of what had just happened. The new memorandum retained its call for strong measures. Goals stayed the same, but new opportunities might now be available. The word war still was not mentioned. But on June 30, Berchtold spoke of the need for a final and fundamental reckoning with Serbia. This was something that had to be discussed with Germany. Austria-Hungary's government was not strong enough to take a stand on its own. In requesting European royalty not to attend the funeral services for Franz Ferdinand, the Vienna authorities made an exception for Wilhelm II. The Kaiser was invited in his capacity as a personal friend of the deceased, yet would be available for policy discussions and decisions. However, German officials feared another attack. Out of a concern for the Kaiser's safety, his aides persuaded him to decline the invitation. How could the Habsburg government enlist the Kaiser's help in carrying out whichever policy it adopted? The solicitation of German support had to be embodied in a plan, and it had to be in writing. Such was the advice of Germany's ambassador in Vienna, Count Heinrich von Tschirschky. Berchtold, as recounted earlier, already had something in writing, his Foreign Office memorandum, urging that Serbia be encircled, isolated, and crushed, which with some modifications could become the requisite written proposal. The Emperor of Austria, Franz Joseph, agreed to supply a cover letter to Wilhelm. The letter was written, Emperor to Emperor, man to man. Count Alexander Hoyos, a firebrand in his mid-30s who served as Berchtold's chief of staff, volunteered to act as courier. Hoyos had reason to believe that his mission was promising. Only days before, on July 1, he had conversed at length with Victor Naumann, a German journalist with close ties to Berlin officialdom, and especially to the Foreign Office. Naumann told him that if ever Vienna was going to ask Berlin for support, this was the time. The Kaiser was shocked by the assassinations. Moreover, throughout the government there was less opposition to initiating a preventive war against Russia than there had been ever before. This is interesting because it suggests that on balance Berlin still was opposed to launching such a war. This was the time to annihilate Serbia, Naumann said. In his view, if at the present moment, when Kaiser Wilhelm is horrified at the Sarajevo murder, he is spoken to in the right way, he will give Austria all assurances and this time go to the length of war because he perceives the dangers for the monarchical principle. Naumann may have been speaking not just for himself, but for a group within the German government. Whether he was or not, he was believed to be both shrewd and well-informed. In fact, just before journeying to Vienna, he had come from a meeting with Wilhelm von Stumm, a hardliner in the German Foreign Office. In Germany at the time there were those who saw what had happened in Sarajevo as an opportunity for taking action by Germany or action by Austria. The Saxon ambassador in Berlin reported to his home government on July 2 that the German military was pressing for an immediate war while Russia and France were unready. These views were widespread, reported Austria's ambassador in Berlin. Moltke, Germany's chief of staff, vacationing on July 5, saw another alternative if it were Austria that took the field. Austria must beat the Serbs and then make peace quickly, demanding an Austro-Serbian alliance as the sole condition. Just as Prussia did with Austria in 1866. Berchtold cabled the German embassy in Vienna that his envoy Hoyos, a personal friend of the nephew of Germany's Chancellor, was en route to Berlin in hopes of seeing the Kaiser and the Chancellor, and would arrive the following morning. It would be a tight schedule. Wilhelm was to leave on July 6 for his annual North Sea cruise. Berlin, July 5. In the morning Hoyos briefed Austria's veteran ambassador to Germany, Ladislaus Soyani-Marek, who then left for Potsdam and lunched with the Kaiser. Meanwhile Hoyos had lunch with Arthur Zimmermann, Under-Secretary of the German Foreign Office. It was at the lower-ranking lunch meeting that the Austrian envoy was most open about his country's real goals. Hoyos spoke openly of war, of wiping Serbia off the map, and of partitioning Serbia among neighboring states afterwards. He met with a sympathetic reception. Meanwhile, at Potsdam, Soyani gave Kaiser Wilhelm the two documents that Hoyos had brought with him. The Foreign Office memorandum concluded by saying that it had been written before the murder of the Archduke and had been confirmed in its analysis by that event. The covering letter was in a more personal and moving vein. Both documents focused largely on Romania, warning of its increasing closeness to Serbia and to Russia. Neither called for specific action, although a stated objective was to be the elimination of Serbia, as a factor of political power in the Balkans. Wilhelm began the discussion by saying that he would have to consult the Chancellor. After lunch, however, pressed to say more, he did so. He pledged Germany's unconditional support for Austria-Hungary in whatever it chose to do in its conflict with Serbia. He gave what historians have called a carte blanche, or a blank check. He said he would back the dual monarchy even if Russia intervened. He warned his guest, however, that Austria must strike quickly. He then met with the Chancellor and with such of his military advisers as could be found at short notice in summertime, and did so again the following morning. A consensus emerged in support of Wilhelm's decision. Even the Chancellor was in agreement. According to the latest scholarship, it was mainly Chancellor Bateman Hollweg who worked out the terms of the German response. A career civil servant, 57 years old, he had spent a career trying to restrain powerful forces and intemperate personalities. As Chancellor for 5 years, he had felt the pressure of army officers who believed war with Russia to be inevitable, and who advocated a preemptive strike before the Russians were ready. He was exposed also to the countervailing pressure from Tirpitz to delay going to war until the distant point when the German fleet could deter Britain. Bateman was aware that the Kaiser, no matter what he said, in the end usually opted for peace. Now there was the July 4 written inquiry from Vienna as to whether Germany would protect Austria-Hungary against Russia, if Austria-Hungary tried to crush Serbia. What the Austrians wanted to do was not spelled out in writing. It was not clear that they had the nerve to do anything at all. But both sides, Berlin and Vienna, were worried, as it turned out, about what might happen if the requested guarantee were not given. Each side was conscious of its international isolation. Each was afraid of losing its only real ally. In German government circles one concern was that, after Franz Joseph died, the Habsburg Empire could disintegrate. Another concern was that, as in the Moroccan crisis of 1911, the dual monarchy would not back Germany in its quarrels, it would fight only in its own. In Austria-Hungary, on the other hand, some worried that Germany would walk away from an ally that proved useless because it lacked the courage to fight at all. The essence of the consensus that developed among the Germans on July the 5th to the 6th was that circumstances now were favorable to a bold design, that Austria-Hungary could deal with its Serbian problem without risking a larger war, provided that Vienna struck swiftly. The German response to the Hoyos mission, according to Bergon's authoritative work, bore the stamp of Bateman, who apparently devised it. It was Berlin's plan, though the world was to be kept from knowing this, that Vienna undertook to follow. The plan was for Austria to strike rapidly, crush Serbia, and present Europe with a fait accompli. On July 6, Bateman confirmed to the Austrians the Kaiser's secret commitment to support Austria in case of war. Most historians have condemned the German pledge as reckless. Samuel Williamson, a leading scholar of Austria-Hungary's role in the origins of World War I, writes, Germany, by its pledges, had surrendered the direction and the pace of the July crisis to Austria. Yet the check may not have been entirely blank. The Germans may have believed that it was their own plan, a quick strike, that Austria would carry into effect, so they were not really turning over decision-making to Vienna. Then, too, there were qualifications to Germany's pledge, or at least Kaiser Wilhelm may have believed that they were implicit. The guarantee was issued in the context of several years of warfare in the Balkans during which Austria already had asked at least 3 times for the statement of support that Hoyos had received, eliciting 1 yes and 2 no's. The Kaiser had certain preconditions in mind for pledging full support to Austria-Hungary in its continuing conflicts with Serbia, preconditions that become clearer if viewed within the context of 1912-14 rather than of 1914 alone. Austria-Hungary had to be seen, at least by the German people, and preferably by all of Europe, as the provoked party. That, in Wilhelm's view, had not been the case in the early autumn of 1912 or the late spring of 1914 but had been true in the late autumn of 1912, and now was true again, because of the Sarajevo killings. Austria-Hungary had to act by itself and with lightning speed. The Kaiser clearly believed that Austria intended to punish Serbia for the killings. He either was not told or did not understand that the dual monarchy proposed to destroy Serbia, a goal that Wilhelm had blocked in the past when it was openly avowed. Circumstances had to be such that Russia, France, and England were unlikely to intervene. That is what the Kaiser and much of his entourage believed to be the case in July 1914. Weizmann, who was designated to watch over the operation against Serbia on behalf of Germany, understood that there was a risk of igniting a conflagration, but believed it to be only a slight risk. Wilhelm believed that for all practical purposes there was no risk at all. The Kaiser's conviction was that the crisis would pass quickly, that the situation would be cleared up within a week, because of Serbia's backing down. Alternatively, Wilhelm explained to one of his naval officers, the Austrian government will demand the most far-reaching satisfaction from Serbia and will, as soon as this is not given, move its troops into Serbia. As he saw it, there would be a quick Habsburg military occupation of Belgrade, the Serb capital, which was conveniently located on the river that formed the Austro-Hungarian frontier, followed by an imposed peace treaty forcing Serbia to become an Austrian ally. On July the 5th to the 6th neither the Kaiser nor his advisers believed that they were risking much by extending their guarantee. Erich von Falkenhayn, Prussian Minister of War, was not convinced that Vienna was really in earnest or had taken any firm resolution. Germany risked nothing because in all likelihood it would never be called upon to make good on its guarantee. The consensus was that the Russians, though friends of Serbia, will not join in after all. The Kaiser said to Soyani that Russia was not by any means prepared for war, and he told his military advisers that France would scarcely let it come to a war because it still lacked heavy artillery. Moreover, he did not believe that the Tsar would enter a war on the side of regicides. Falkenhayn asked if additional preparations should be made for a war involving the great powers, and Wilhelm said no. Germany's military leaders had made it clear that, in any case, they were prepared for all eventualities. The Kaiser and his generals may have supported the blank check decision for opposite reasons. He was in favor of it because he believed that war would not result from it, while some of them may have been in favor of it because it raised the possibility that a war would result from it. So it was that, 3 weeks after refusing to pledge unconditional support to the living Franz Ferdinand, Kaiser Wilhelm avowed such support to the cause of the dead Franz Ferdinand. What had changed was the death of the Archduke. Wilhelm was not alone in this, the leaders of other countries felt the same way. Europe's sympathies now would be against Serbia, and with the Austrians, if they struck back immediately, and if they acted alone rather than in collusion with Germany. But the lies, or at least misleading statements, told by the Austrian and German governments threatened to catch up with them. Austria-Hungary lied when it claimed to be striking back for the murder of the Archduke. In fact, the killings at Sarajevo had relatively little to do with the Habsburg desire to crush Serbia. What gave away Austria's lie in the first instance was that it did not attack immediately, which is what one does when one strikes out in anger or in self-defense. Alternatively, one would pursue a full judicial inquiry to its conclusion, and then publish its results to the world, which Vienna lacked the patience to do. The fact, known now, though not then, That the memo submitted to the Kaiser in support of the plan to go to war was the same memo that had been prepared before the murders in Sarajevo shows that it did not arise from that event. Austria did not play its part very well. Its behavior in the weeks that followed did nothing to persuade Europe that it was primarily motivated by a desire to avenge the slain Archduke. Disbelief crept over Europe. Vienna's claims appeared less and less credible in the ensuing weeks. To Germany, the Austrian representatives apparently gave the impression that they would do what the Kaiser insisted upon, act with lightning speed, finishing the matter in a week or 2 or 3. The Germans counted on it, but the Habsburg Empire was incapable of fulfilling this expectation. It was another misstatement that was apt to catch up with the Austrians, though perhaps they themselves did not realize they could not perform as promised. Then there were the Germans, not perhaps lying, but showing a want of candor. The Kaiser and many of his men were certain that none of the other great powers of Europe would intervene to halt the expected Austrian strike. They committed to ward off France and Russia in the firm belief that they never would be called upon to do so. They were signing a check that they believed would never be cashed.